The human journey for freedom is a powerful, ongoing story. It's a journey that begins with the earliest societies and has continued through wars, revolutions, and countless movements for justice. This drive for freedom is woven into our history and shapes who we are today. At its core, the quest for freedom isn't just about escaping oppression, it's about securing the right to live fully, to express oneself, and to shape one's destiny without interference. To understand this journey, let's look at how it evolved from ancient times through the ages and into our modern era. In ancient civilizations, freedom as we know it didn't really exist. Early societies were deeply hierarchical, with strict social structures. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, the concept of freedom was limited, often tied to one's status. But even then, seeds of human rights began to take root. The Cyrus cylinder, created by Cyrus the Great of Persia in the 6th century BCE, is often considered one of the earliest declarations of human rights. It promoted the idea of tolerance and protection for slaves, a groundbreaking concept at the time. Cyrus's idea wasn't about full freedom in the modern sense, but it recognized the importance of dignity and respect in governance. The foundation was laid for a new kind of thinking that people deserved certain basic freedoms. Fast forward to medieval Europe, where the Magna Carta was signed in 1215. This document was a revolutionary step. The Magna Carta limited the king's power and established that everyone, including rulers, was subject to the law. For the first time, we see the idea that there are certain rights that cannot be taken away, rights that don't depend on social rank or status. While these rights were limited to the noble class at the time, the Magna Carta planted a seed. It showed that power could be challenged and that freedom could be legally protected, setting the stage for future demands for universal rights.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
The Enlightenment era brought a massive shift in thinking. Philosophers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau introduced ideas that would forever change how society viewed freedom. They argued that all individuals have natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that governments exist to protect these rights, not to take them away. This shift didn't just transform political theory, it sparked revolutions. The American and French revolutions both drew heavily on Enlightenment ideas, declaring that freedom and equality were worth fighting for. These revolutions weren't perfect. Freedom was still limited to certain groups, but they marked a turning point, inspiring people around the world to demand their rights. And here's the question: what does freedom mean if it's only given to some and denied to others? This was a question that began to be asked more intensely in the 19th and 20th centuries. The abolitionist movements, the women's suffrage movement, and labor rights movements all pushed back against systems that restricted freedom to a privileged few. These movements argued that true freedom could only exist if it was available to everyone. The fight for equal rights in these eras brought the concept of freedom closer to its modern meaning, not just the absence of oppression, but the presence of opportunities for all people, regardless of their background, to live and thrive. The 20th century was a whirlwind of change in the journey for freedom. After 2 world wars, there was a universal recognition that freedom needed to be a protected global standard. In 1948, the United Nations established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For the first time, there was a document that declared that freedom, dignity, and equality were rights for every human being, regardless of nationality, race, or religion. This was a monumental step, one that showed the world was willing to work together to protect human rights. The 20th century's commitment to freedom and human rights set the stage for an era of powerful movements and transformative changes. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was more than a document, it was a promise that nations would stand together to protect the dignity and liberty of every person. But that promise would need to be fought for and defended over and over again. The civil rights movements that followed worldwide brought that commitment to life. In the United States, figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X led the struggle against racial segregation and discrimination. Their efforts weren't just about legal equality, but about changing the entire framework of society, ensuring that freedom wasn't just written in law, but experienced in daily life. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 marked a significant victory, breaking down the institutional barriers that had denied freedom to African Americans. But even beyond the legislation, these movements inspired a global wave, proving that freedom is worth fighting for at every level of society. Simultaneously, decolonization movements were shaking up the world as countries in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean fought to free themselves from colonial rule. Figures like Mahatma Gandhi in India and Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana symbolized the determination of nations to govern themselves, free from the control of foreign powers. These movements were fueled by the belief that every nation had the right to self-determination. They highlighted a new dimension of freedom, the right to cultural identity, self-governance, and control over one's land and resources. As one country after another gained independence, it reinforced the idea that freedom wasn't just a personal right, it was a right of nations and peoples as well. But freedom isn't static, and new challenges constantly arise. The fall of colonialism didn't immediately guarantee economic or social freedom. Many newly independent nations struggled with poverty, corruption, and the lingering effects of colonial exploitation. This brought forward the concept that freedom wasn't just about independence from external rule, but about creating a society where individuals have access to resources, opportunities, and fair treatment. Economic justice became a key aspect of freedom, as leaders and thinkers argued that without the means to live well, people could never truly be free. In recent decades, we've seen new dimensions of freedom come into focus. The digital age, with its global connectivity, has created new opportunities but also new threats to freedom. On one hand, the internet gives people access to information, the ability to communicate instantly across the globe, and platforms to express their ideas. On the other hand, it has introduced concerns around privacy, surveillance, and the power of corporations and governments to control information. Today, we're facing questions about freedom that would have been unimaginable a century ago. What does it mean to be free in a world where our data, our identities, and even our thoughts are tracked and influenced by technology? The fight for freedom has also evolved to include social issues like LGBTQ rights, gender equality, and environmental justice. These movements challenge traditional ideas of freedom, pushing societies to recognize that true freedom means more than just the absence of oppression, it's the active inclusion of all people. LGBTQ activists have highlighted that freedom must include the right to express one's identity without fear. Environmental activists argue that without a sustainable planet, freedom itself is at risk. Gender equality advocates push for a world where people are free from stereotypes and systemic inequality, making it clear that freedom isn't just an abstract concept, but a lived reality that requires constant work. The journey for freedom is a testament to human resilience, adaptability, and hope. Each generation redefines freedom in its own context, building on the struggles and victories of those who came before. This journey shows that freedom isn't just a destination we reach, it's an ongoing process, one that requires vigilance, courage, and unity. The battles we face today may look different from those of the past, but they're part of the same journey, driven by the same unbreakable desire to live with dignity, respect, and purpose. And as we look to the future, the question becomes not just how to preserve freedom, but how to expand it in ways we've never considered. How can we build societies that protect not only individual rights, but also the collective well-being? How do we create systems that support not just personal liberty, but equality, justice, and the freedom to live fully? The journey for freedom is far from over, but it's one that will continue to shape us, inspire us, and define us as long as humanity exists. As we stand on the edge of a new era, the human journey for freedom continues to evolve in ways we couldn't have imagined even a few decades ago. The foundations laid by centuries of struggle have brought us to a place where freedom is a globally recognized right, yet it's a right that must constantly be redefined, defended, and expanded. Today, we face both new challenges and opportunities in our pursuit of freedom. The rise of artificial intelligence, digital surveillance, and big data has fundamentally changed the landscape of personal liberty. On one hand, technology provides us with access to information, connection, and expression like never before. But on the other, it also opens up ways for privacy to be compromised, for data to be weaponized, and for personal autonomy to be infringed upon in subtle, pervasive ways. In a digital age, the very concept of freedom has to account for not just physical autonomy, but digital autonomy. Our online presence, our data, and our digital interactions are now an integral part of who we are, and the protection of this digital identity has become a critical aspect of modern freedom. At the same time, social media platforms have given rise to new kinds of public spaces where ideas can flourish, but they also enable new forms of censorship, manipulation, and echo chambers. As we increasingly live our lives online, the question of who controls these platforms, who monitors our speech, and who has the power to shape public opinion becomes central to our freedom. This brings forth an unprecedented question: what does freedom mean in a world where our beliefs, behaviors, and choices can be shaped by algorithms designed to maximize engagement rather than truth? Beyond technology, the environmental crisis challenges our understanding of freedom in another way. The right to a livable, healthy planet has become inseparable from the idea of freedom. The effects of climate change are already infringing on the lives of millions, from extreme weather events to food and water insecurity, and these challenges are disproportionately impacting vulnerable communities. In this sense, freedom is tied not only to individual rights but to collective responsibility. Protecting the environment isn't just about preserving nature, it's about preserving the conditions necessary for freedom. The right to live free from the threats of climate disaster is fast becoming one of the most pressing issues of our time. Meanwhile, social movements worldwide are expanding the idea of freedom to encompass social and economic equality. Today's freedom struggles include fights against systemic racism, gender inequality, economic disparity, and social injustice. The understanding is growing that freedom without equality is incomplete. It creates a world where some people are free to thrive while others are held back by structural barriers. True freedom means ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or economic background, has the same opportunities and rights. This shift moves freedom from being a purely individual concept to a collective one, where the freedom of each person is tied to the freedom of all. As we continue to confront these new realities, the human journey for freedom is revealing something profound about the nature of freedom itself. It's no longer simply about breaking free from oppression, it's about building societies where all people can live in dignity, safety, and equality. It's about creating systems that don't just grant freedom but support it, cultivate it, and protect it for future generations. Looking to the future, the journey for freedom calls for a new kind of vigilance. Just as people fought against tyrants and oppressive regimes in the past, today we are called to challenge threats to freedom that are more complex, less visible, but equally powerful. Whether it's the influence of tech giants, the threat of environmental collapse, or the persistence of social injustice, the journey for freedom requires us to stand together and advocate for a world where every person's right to live freely is respected. And so, the journey for freedom endures, powered by the sacrifices, courage, and vision of countless individuals who have dared to challenge limits, break barriers, and demand a world that respects the dignity of all. The struggles and victories of the past remind us that freedom is not a static prize, it's a living, breathing force that requires care, courage, and continual action. As long as humanity exists, the pursuit of freedom will continue to shape our lives, inspire our actions, and drive us to create a world where every person can live fully, without fear, without oppression, and with the limitless possibility that only true freedom provides.